call this meeting to order at 6:30. If we could stand for the flag salute. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Member Raffinelli.
Present.
Member Schill.
Present.
Member Pache.
Present.
Member Earl.
Present.
Member Bicknell.
Present.
Chair Taylor.
Present. All right, everyone probably had a chance to review the agenda. Are there any late changes?
No late changes to the agenda, Chair.
Okay, if there's no further changes to the agenda, they stand approved. It's now time for public comment. If anyone is requesting to speak to the board regarding all items not subject to specific public hearing, they may come forward at this time. Please state your name and limit comments to 3 minutes. Written comments may be submitted to the clerk prior to the meeting.
Hello, I'm John, voice.
Okay.
And move
John,
along.
can you push the button on the top?
Yep, it's boom. You got it. We were just wondering where we're at with the Parks project. We're interested in the fence around the property, and when we might want to start picking. We want a gate. We're just wondering when we can expect maybe the fence going in, and maybe if there's a timeline on any other construction. A lot of people have questions. I've heard about maybe a part of the gravel parking lot or whatever, but I was just wondering if there was any updates on the Boys Park thing.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move along to the consent agenda. For first, the approval of minutes from the January 8th meeting. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for our January 8th, 2025 meeting?
I move to approve the minutes from our January 20, did you say 28th? January 8th.
Oh,
Yeah,
28th,
thank you.
Sorry.
Hartford.
I second that.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Okay. First on the agenda is the Park and Trail Design Standards, Engineering Standards, Volume 3. Mr. Crownhart, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Bridget, and thank you, Parks Board. Before I dive into our presentation today on Parks and Trail Design Standards, I'll just share with the public that if you have questions about particular parks and the work that's being done within them, I can definitely provide answers for those. For example, Boyce Park is a park that's getting ready to go out to bid to get one portion of the park built. And as part of that, we're looking at including a fence of some type. Whether or not there'll be a gate, that's still kind of up for discussion in terms of phase 1, but I know it's something we're looking at for another phase. So with that, if the public would like to send me an email, I'm sure I can answer more specific questions and reach out to you as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Perfect. So thank you for letting me go through that process, just so we're still following all the rules. All right, with that, Park and Trail Design Standards. So I have been geeking out about park and trail design for months, absolute months, because I've spent my time, and I'm sure you have as well, walking many of our trails and spending time in our parks. And while they are spectacular spaces, there's always opportunities for improvement. And as I've built relationships with our maintenance and operations teams, I've learned a whole lot about how we can install these park and trail assets in ways that make maintenance easier and safer for workers, help drive down maintenance costs long term, protecting the fiscal stability of the city, as well as ensuring accessibility across all of our assets for all users throughout the city, regardless of their ability. So our objective today and throughout this entire project is to establish park and trail design standards for the city, specifically for parks and recreation. This is something that's done within some cities, but it's something that more cities are starting to pick up on. And for us, this will be a great opportunity for us to clarify to developers that while they do need to develop 25% of all land that they develop within the city, this will help specify not only how much space, but what needs to be within that space. So with that, I will do my best to run through this presentation and help give you guys kind of a glimpse at what we've started to put together and to get some of your feedback. Slide. So again, the overall objective of the project is to create these standards so we can create safer, more accessible, more fiscally sound spaces within our community. And tonight our objective is to, we want to talk through with you what we have started to put together as a staff. We've taken inspiration from our peer municipalities in the county and across the state. We've looked at other standards in other places, but most importantly, we had a discussion as a Parks Board in June of last year on this very topic to kind of start touching in on what this might look like. So again, tonight our objective is to get your feedback so we can help improve a draft that we'll bring back to you and then to council for further adoption. So throughout this presentation, interrupt, ask questions, ask for clarification. By no means do I expect us to wait until we get all the way to the end and then start asking questions. This is your meeting, and let's have a good dialogue about this. Slide. So why create parks and trail standards? I touched on this a little bit before, but part of this is about bringing the city of Ridgefield into alignment with the best practices across the parks and recreation industry. There has been a movement over the past 10 to 15 years to create more accessible spaces for users. And this will move us towards inclusive design principles that can be included into playgrounds, into trails, into other infrastructure such as trash cans. You wouldn't think that there would have to be accessibility standards for trash cans, but there would. And I'll explain some of those nuances as we go through this presentation. Another reason is because we are a growing community. And when you look at our demographics, we are younger and more diverse than other jurisdictions within the county. So making sure that we're serving all residents of all types, I think is going to be something that's going to be important for us long term. On top of that, our community survey year after year has continually told us that the community values outdoor spaces and outdoor recreation. So to place a standard upon how these are built helps reflect that value back to the community. And on the proactive side, this is about not only ensuring that the city's parks and recreation assets are to a particular standard, it's to ensure that all publicly accessible or publicly available parks and recreation assets fit these standards. So it's not just for the trails that the city of Ridgefield owns. If a developer comes in and is going to be building a trail across their property, it would need to fall within these same standards. If a development is coming in and they would like to put in a play structure, it would have to fall within these standards. So it's a way to ensure that for the end user, which is the residents of Ridgefield, when they move between park and trail assets, it should be a seamless experience, whether or not it's owned by the city or owned by one of our neighborhoods within the community. So that's our objective there. So let's start off by looking at how we compare. So our current Volume 1 engineering standards, which is the standards that specifies our infrastructure for the city of Ridgefield, is 102 pages long. I have a copy here if you would like to read it. Wonderful reading. But this is everything from how wide is a street, what's the amount of gravel that needs to be under asphalt, where do pipes need to go, everything that I don't want to spend a ton of time reading up on. I've done the rating for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But there's about 100 pages in that. In Volume 2 is our building code, and there are 53 pages, and this is everything from ensuring that structures are built in ways that prevent wildfires, that ensure safety for users and residents and customers, all of those types of things. The current draft that I have put together for the Parks and Recreation standards are currently 16 pages. So fairly scaled down, but referencing a lot of other materials. When you look at our peers across the county or across the state, Camas, Washington has about 8 pages of trail standards specifically, and they house them within their Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces plan, as opposed to engineering standards. Bellingham, Washington has more than 100 pages for their specific trail and recreation standards, which goes deep into what particular type of picnic bench, all the way down to what model it needs to be, and what materials need to be used for all of their picnic structures. Bend, Oregon has 143 pages, and again, it digs very deep into very specific items for their park district. Clark County currently does not have standards specific to park and trails in place, and neither does the city of Vancouver. But I know that's something that they're starting to explore. The city of Ridgefield, as of right now, our Volume 1 standards has a half a page on on trails for the city of Ridgefield. They specify 3 types of trails, the widest of which is 6 feet, and the other 2 are 4 feet wide. And it has nothing in there about what type of gravel needs to be used, what does an accessible trail look like. The grade that they've specified is 15%. Long and short of it, it's a very small standard that has an opportunity for us to help define for developers that are coming in. Slide. Okay. Before I dig into all of the standards, let's talk a little bit about outdoor accessibility. So, as we all know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is really the first step into ensuring that spaces and public spaces are accessible to all users throughout the country. When we think about outdoor recreation spaces, accessibility is a term that we try and use sparingly. To call something an accessible trail does not fully describe what that trail is. It implies that all trails are accessible for every user. The preferred terminology is trails that follow accessibility guidelines, because if you've ever been hiking in U.S. forests or out at Whipple Creek or in other spaces throughout our community, you have probably come across trails that you would not consider to be accessible to an individual in a wheelchair, or an individual with a walking impairment or a visual impairment. The United States Forest Service has specified standards for exceptions. So for our outdoor spaces, there can be exceptions to accessibility, provided that it falls within particular standards. These standards are specified in the Forest Service Outdoor Recreation Accessibility Guidelines, which I have a copy of here if you want to see it, as well as the Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines. Essentially, these are things like, if the trail was designed as a mountain biking trail, and that's the designed use of that trail, then that is an opportunity where following the specific guidelines of the Americans with Disabilities Act is not required. Or if you were to put in a trail and it were to create ecological damage to the environment or habitat, then that is a space where not following those guidelines is appropriate. Now, it does provide parameters for what those look like, but instead of trying to create new standards for us, the standards that I'm going to be presenting to you today reference these to say, if you're going to build within the city of Ridgefield, it needs to fall within the Forest Service Outdoor Recreation Accessibility Standards. Does that make sense? Perfect. They're really interesting documents if you want to read them. I encourage you. So with that, just keep that in mind as we start digging through here. And ask questions about accessibility. As Ridgefield moves forward, I don't anticipate that we're going to have every single asset that we build be fully accessible to every user. But we do want to be conscious about what we are building to ensure that we're thinking about what's the designed use, what's the proper use case, and are we providing for those assets that need it, there is accessibility. I think that's something that you as Parks Board and Council can take time to consider. Perfect. All right, let's get started. So, Volume 3. Currently, right now, we've broken up the standards into 7 separate chapters. First chapter being on planning, design, and approval requirements. The second chapter being trails, followed by playgrounds, amenities and fixtures, which is essentially the furnishings that we put inside parks. Chapter 5 will be on signage and how to help people wayfind throughout our system. Chapter 6 is some landscaping, and very importantly, we're going to talk about maintenance and safety as well. Slide. All right, Chapter 1. This is, I don't have very much here for you, because frankly, Chapter 1 of Volume 3 will reference Volume 1 of our engineering standards, which specifies the process by which developers submit plans. So when a developer comes to the city and says, I would like to build this housing development and we would like to put in a park, what they do is they submit engineering plans that specify how wide the roads are, where each house lot is going to be, how big is their yard, all of those different aspects. This specifies what needs to be included in it and includes that they would need to provide park and recreation specific plans for their park assets. So where is the playground being placed? What's the model of that playground? What's the base that's going to be within that playground? Where is each trash can going to be placed within the park or within that trail system? Where are all the signs? What are those signs? So that helps us as a city review those plans and say, yep, this is fitting within the standards of the rest of the standards that I'm presenting to you today. Before I dig into chapters 2 through 7, do you guys have any questions about that before I move forward?
I had a question, Corey, about the level of trail information that comes up during the planning and design process.
Yes.
That would be, if it's going to be referencing Volume 1 as opposed to being what we're discussing here for Volume 3.
Oh,
Is there a trail-specific planning and design?
for Volume 3, there will be. When it's saying that it's referencing referencing Volume 1, it's specifically referencing the documents that they have to submit, and those documents being the engineering plans. Essentially, this goes into very technical engineering language, such as what type of paper this application needs to be on, what needs to be included on it, what type of measurements they're using, those submission, what type of file they send it in. It's very technical in terms of the actual file and how we read it. It does not actually deal with the standard itself. The standard itself is what they have to apply that engineering plan to. Essentially, that engineering plan is proof that they're following the rest of the standards.
Okay. I was concerned about it more from the perspective of how early in the process does the city start to understand placement of trails as well as that placement of playgrounds?
Yes, pretty early in the process. Developers, when they come to the city, they submit a pre-application that goes through the community development department that I'm included in on to help review what their initial plans are. We provide feedback to them. They update those plans and come back to a official application, which then is reviewed by the city. From there, it continues through land use and community development, a couple of steps, until it finally goes to the Public Works Department for engineering review. There are multiple steps there to review it until we get to pre-construction. And then there is construction. During construction, there's continued inspections by our inspection team at Public Works as well as community development to ensure that what is being built is to the plans that have been submitted. And then finally, there is an approval process at the end to approve that development.
Terrific. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll jump into slide 2, my favorite of all of the chapters that we have, and that is our trails. So let's go ahead to the next slide. All right, so the proposal that I'm giving to you today is an idea of what our trail system could look like long-term for the city of Ridgefield. The way that it's structured is that our trails would be broken up into 2 different types of trails. We would have multimodal trails and we would have recreation trails. Our multimodal trails are trails that are transportation focused. These are about helping us move around the city of Ridgefield. If you want to bike from one neighborhood to another, a multimodal trail is going to be the one to get you there. You want to head down to the waterfront for the 4th of July or for an event or to watch the Northern Lights, you'll want to use a multimodal trail. So because they would be transportation focused, the standards that I'm referencing for these are the Washington State Department of Transportation Shared Youth Paths. Again, another large document. The Shared Youth Path standards specify that the trail needs to be 12 feet wide with a 2-foot shoulder. They're asphalt. This is similar to what you see in Salmon Creek and the Salmon Creek Trail System or along Burnt Bridge Creek. That's what you're thinking about in terms of a shared youth path. We'll talk a little bit more about the grade of what that trail looks like here in a second. The way I've specified this is that there would be 2 different types of multimodal trails. The first being arterial trails, which is our primary connectors across the city, and our collector trails, which are trails that take you from essentially our local neighborhood to the larger arterial trail. So think of a collector trail may take you from, say, Osprey Point over to Hillhurst, and Hillhurst may have a larger arterial along it. With that, these both follow the same standards of 12 feet wide in most circumstances, 10 feet wide in limited circumstances. Those would be our transportation trails. On the other side of the coin is our recreation-focused trails. There are many beautiful spaces within the city of Ridgefield, and so recreation trails provide us an opportunity to get users to unique spaces, whether that be to a ridge to oversee a site or down to a creek. These are those trails that are not about transportation, but about getting to what I believe is called, I should remember this. The U.S. Forest Service calls them, I believe, like places of interest or places of interest. So if there's a particular viewpoint, that's what they're trying to get people to. So our recreation trails would fall underneath the U.S. Forest Service trail standards. So this would allow for dirt trails. This would allow for asphalt trails. This would allow for boardwalks in some areas. The way that I've broken up the way that we've broken up our recreation trails into 2 different facets. The first being hiking trails. So we would have a specific trail in the city of Ridgefield that is a hiking trail. The way we're looking at this is that this would be a recreation-focused trail with a designed use of hiker and pedestrian, and it would be a Class 5 trail according to the U.S. Forest Service standards. Essentially, this is 6 to 10 feet wide, compacted dirt, with the steepest grade of being 8%. A semi-primitive trail, on the other hand, is more open. The U.S. Forest Service allows for all different types of trails, whether they be equestrian, mountain biking, or cycling. They also have trails for ATVs, and they even have trail standards for snowshoeing and cross-country skiing trails. Not that I think we're ever going to build one of those. Maybe tomorrow we will. But by allowing for semi-primitive trails, what we're essentially saying to developers is, if you would like to build something that is within the U.S. Forest Service standards, that is different and unique, but still falls within those standards, you can, but you have to get clearance from the city. You have to ask us. If somebody is building in a development in a space that has wonderful opportunities for mountain biking trails and they would like to have that be part of their system, they can provide that. On the other side of the coin, if we were to acquire a property one day and we wanted to put in mountain biking trails, we now have our own standards to follow to give to contractors, developers to build those spaces. So this allows for a wide breadth of types of trails, everything from our 12-foot wide arterial trails that are about transportation down to even single track mountain biking within the city. All of them would have to be approved by the city in that development, in the plan review process, but it allows developers to choose what may work best for that space, and it allows us as a city to press upon developers that you'll be required to put in an arterial trail because of our Parks, Recreation, Open Spaces plan is calling for these types of trails in these areas. Before I dig into specifically the multimodal trails and the recreation trails, do you guys have questions or thoughts?
I do have a question because it was brought up to me by a citizen about riding their horses on our trails. So on all of these different types of trails, and as they connect, which trails are patrons allowed to have their horses on?
As of right now, the city doesn't have any standards saying you can't
Okay.
ride a horse on a trail. So you could ride a
Perfect.
horse on any of our trails as of now, as long as you're doing it safely.
Great.
But if I were to suggest down the line which trails would be more appropriate for equestrian use, it would be a hiking trail or a semi-primitive trail that has a designed use of equestrian.
I think similar, to build on that, I know I've seen an uptick, at least in the couple of years I've lived here, of golf carts. And I know some people have even said, like, I want to take my golf cart to Costco one day, and if we ever get a trail there, they might. So would that be permitted on the multimodal trail, or no automotive?
That is a policy question that you and council would have an opportunity to take a look at. Would a multimodal trail be wide enough? Could it physically have those on there? They could. They could have those on there. I think there's a number of other things that may need to be looked at, such as speed limits, enforcement, striping and signing for those trails. But I think it's not out of the question.
Will multimodal trails also have like bridges if required over little gullies or ravines or?
Oh, potentially, yes.
And is this a standard that you're hoping to connect neighborhood? Like one of the weaknesses I find in general in North America, but also in Ridgefield, is that we're not connected between the neighborhoods. Like even for the high schoolers to come down here, there isn't a dedicated bike path. You have to go down Hillhurst.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that as a team, that's one of our challenges over the next few years, is to help build this out. The overall strategy that I'm trying to bring to Parks Board and the city is by developing engineering standards, we have how we build something. Next year, we'll be renewing and updating our Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces plan. This is the city's 6-year strategy and comprehensive plan for what parks and trails looks like. Within that, it specifies what types of trails need to be built where. So when developers bring forward a plan to develop a piece of property, if there is a trail in our pros plan that goes across their property, they are required to put in that trail. So by specifying these standards today, it's kind of that first step towards creating these types of standards wherein when a development comes in and wants to build something, they can't just say, well, I'm going to put in a 4-foot sidewalk and say we're connecting our neighborhoods together. They'll be required to put in what you deem to be the appropriate standard, which may be a multimodal trail that follows WashDOT standards.
Does this connect at all to any plan that the council has for climate change goals or United Nations climate change goals? Because you're encouraging people to walk and ride bikes or even use electric golf carts?
The engineering standards wouldn't have that within its scope. However, a Parks, Recreation, Open Spaces plan could have that in there. So I think next year that's going to be our interesting task.
Do we have any other questions? Go ahead, Beth.
I was just going to say, after many years. This is, I think, an excellent classifications. I think this is a terrific way for us to finally have the different buckets that will allow for trail connections, which, as we all know, is regularly reported as the number one thing that people want in Ridgefield, is to get the trails connected. And so I think if this facilitates by giving language and guidelines, I think more power to you, and thank you so much for the good work on it. Looks really good.
Thank you. All right, next slide. All right, well, let's talk about multimodal trails for a second. Oh, pardon me.
So if they disassemble the whole DEI, the American Disabilities Act falls underneath that. We would not abandon that. Is that correct?
That's a policy question that's for council and Parks Board to determine. That said, you can set a standard that is appropriate for you all.
Okay.
Absolutely. Wonderful. All right, let's talk multimodal trails. So when, in the world of building trails, there's a term that comes up often, and that is designed use. Trails typically have a specified designed use. That means what type of user is this particular trail built for. So for example, a Forest Service trail may be designed for a hiker or pedestrian, but can be used by a mountain bike or a horse, or as an equestrian use. So as we're going through and I'm talking about designed use, it doesn't mean that it's limited to only that type of use. It means that it's designed to a specific one of those users, but it may allow for other types of users to be on there. So for example, our multimodal trails are designed for pedestrians and cyclists, but it doesn't mean that there can't be golf carts or other types of transportation methods on them, just so you're tracking. Our multimodal trails will be focused in on transportation. According to the WSDOT standards, the minimum width is 10 feet wide. The preferred is 12 feet. It only goes to 10 feet in particular circumstances where the terrain is simply, it's not feasible. But 10 feet wide is the absolute minimum. 12 feet is the standard. More importantly to this is there is a 2-foot shoulder on either side, which is very important for keeping the strength of that asphalt there. It also allows for extra space for, sometimes it's nicer running on gravel than it is running on pavement, but it also allows for maintenance vehicles to get through these spaces a lot easier. The standards do specify that there has to be at least a 10-foot clearance throughout the entire length of the trail. It does specify how far signs need to be off of it so you don't smack your head into it while you're biking down the road or biking down the path. And it specifies that the maximum grade is 5%. So very gradual grade that someone who is using a mobility device will be able to utilize. Any questions on multimodal trails?
Actually, I have a question regarding all the trails real quick.
Yeah.
For new development that's going through, when they submit, is there a percentage that we're looking at? Like, should they have a collector trail to a main road, and then like the rest hiking trails? I know you mentioned there's also offer of semi-primitive, but is there a percentage so that not all just like semi-primitive in that development, or like are we looking? What are their guidelines for development at this point then for accessibility within that neighborhood?
Currently, right now, our standards are focused in on following what's within the PROS plan. So if the PROS plans say that there's a trail that goes across their property, the PROS plan states that it has to be a particular type of trail. Our current trail standards have 3 types, a type 1, type 2, type 3, type 1 being the largest trail that we have. So when we update the PROS plan, we would specify that they would have to put in either an arterial or a collector trail within their spaces based on that plan. Okay. Perfect.
Right, I had a quick question. I know we're in the engineering standards side of it, but if golf carts and e-bikes are on multimodal trails, is there a recommendation for a particular speed limit, or is that already established? Is there something that we should put a pin in on that front
I know
to make
that's
sure?
I know that's something that the city is researching. I know that our police department is currently doing research on e-bike e-bike codes across the state on how we might be able to implement that here in the city. Something I've started talking with them about as well. But I think it's something that the council and Parks Board can definitely consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Bignell. Okay. All right, let's talk about our fun recreation trails. So when looking at recreation trails, these are more recreation focused, of course. And for our Ridgefield hiking trail specifically, this would have a designed use of a hiker and a pedestrian with a trail width that is a non-wilderness double lane trail, meaning that it would be at a minimum 72 inches wide and 120 inches wide. When we have developers that would like to build a hiking trail within the city, this is a trail that they would be encouraged to focus in on. And I imagine would be the easiest to be approved based on these standards. However, if they would like to build other trails, they can. They just have to go through a process of requesting, articulating why it needs to be this particular setup, and then it could be approved by the city. So essentially, what we're looking at here for a hiking trail is, I think, 6 feet wide. Any other questions on recreation trails? Any questions on trails overall before we dig into playgrounds?
I had one more question. Is there a part of the plan that discusses upgrading inventory assets throughout the system as time goes on, and a means of addressing that?
This doesn't have that within its scope because this would just be specifying the standards themselves. However, it would require that if we do any upgrades or updates or repairs to a trail, they would have to come within compliance of these standards. So they're grandfathered in until there's a permanent improvement done.
Right, okay.
Now, if the city would like to put together a long-term plan on how to update the overall inventory, that's something that I would love the money for. That would be great. But I know that it's a long-term plan if that's something that Council or Parks Board would like to do.
Cheers to that.
Okay. We ready for playgrounds?
Yes.
All right. Well, if you ask my daughter, she believes that she is the official slide tester for the city, so I know that she'll be excited for these. John, I'm sure your children could be part of it too. We have a team to do it. Okay, let's talk about playground safety. The principles that the standards that we're starting to draft for you to review are focused on a couple of principles. Number one is being child safety. We want to ensure that every child who plays on any playground within the city can do so safely, and parents and guardians can be rest assured that the facilities that they're playing on are safe to use. We also want to ensure that our parks and our playgrounds are as accessible as possible. And with that, we want to focus in on having a system focus for our park system. Playgrounds are wonderful, and sometimes they are mass produced, and they look very similar. If every playground is exactly the same, it's not exactly fun. So if we can have a system that if we can look at plans for playgrounds, we can help suggest to developers different types of playgrounds to help build a tapestry of different types of structures throughout the city instead of having just one basic playground that's replicated all over the place. And sometimes it just comes down to the city paying attention to those and letting developers know, like, hey, do you know that the developer right next to you, or the housing development right next to you, has the exact same playground? Have you considered putting in a nature playground? Have you considered putting in an inclusive design playground? Have you considered putting in a different manufacturer? Those types of things could help developers see that there are other spaces to go to instead of the first Google search that pops up for playgrounds. All right. With that, if you could go back one slide. The big meat of this standard is requiring that every playground that is built within the city has to pass a certified playground safety inspection by a certified inspector. The city currently has 4 inspectors for playground safety on staff, including myself. And developers could either potentially hire the city to do the inspection, or they can reach out to private firms who will do an inspection for them. Those inspections would need to be submitted to the city prior to opening so that we can verify that they are safe for the community. After that initial inspection, then ongoing maintenance and ongoing inspections is the responsibility of the HOA or whoever may own that structure, and that liability is on them. For the city, we do playground inspections twice a year to ensure that all of our play structures are safe for our users.
So we don't have a requirement of the developers or the HOAs to fall within any kind of standard of doing inspections? We just leave it up to their risk of liability? And
This proposal, this initial standard we're putting forward to you is that they would have to have an inspection at commissioning, or if they were to replace their play structure, but ongoing inspections would be the responsibility of the user, of the owner.
I don't know that I like that.
Okay, that's good feedback. We want to know these things.
I can see a play structure going in and all of a sudden, 6 years later, a parent says, this thing's wobbly and it's gonna fall down. I think that if it's within the city limits, those parks, even if they had a different guideline, there should be some guideline that the HOA or the owner has to prove that they did it once a year or once every 2 years, but I think leaving it open is a bad idea. Just for safety reasons.
Oh, it's good to know. This is something, this is gonna help me do research and figure out what are other folks doing.
What other cities do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Member Show.
Well,
Or Vice Chair Show.
To piggyback on what Sandy said, is there a place or location that citizens that attend these parks can submit their information right away?
Yeah, actually, I love that the Ridgefield app. I did it one time, and they got back to me within a day. So
Okay.
I saw there was like a screw that was missing from the very top, and I took a picture, and I just think if more people knew about it.
So maybe advertising or making
Yeah.
sure that's aware to citizens.
Was that a city park, John, or was
Yeah,
it?
it was at City Park.
Okay.
So, or it might have been an HOA one. It was like up on Hillhurst. But,
Okay.
I was up there playing with my kids. I saw there was something missing, and I did a work request, and Public Works got back to me within a day. and
Yeah,
it was out
absolutely.
there.
We encourage everybody to submit those to us, and we get them for play structures that are not ours. And when we get those, we typically reach out to the HOA and let them know.
Okay.
Going back again, I really like Sandy's idea of like there should be some type of guidelines for these HOAs, especially if the HOA kind of dissolves or something, or just the committee's not on top of. I'm not an HOA, so I don't know how they all organize all that. But going along with that, if there's multiple complaints from the community regarding an HOA park that's maybe not up to standards, is there a way for the city to kind of take over that park, or like? Is there any way to, I know there's one park in particular that I always hear complaints about, from a safety standpoint as the parents, about kids climbing up on the very top. I think that's like Larks or something up on, and I mean, it's a tall playground and kids are able to climb up there easily. And so there's a huge safety things, and I'm always seeing parents on Facebook complaining about like, hey, is this your kid kind of thing? Is there any way to go to that, is that an HOA park or a city park?
Oh, no, that's our park.
Oh, that's our park.
That's our
Okay.
park. Yeah.
Then at that point, I don't know what the resolution, it's almost like waiting for a kid to fall at that point, because there have been so many complaints about it, so.
Well, that's another one that I'll bring back to the team that we can discuss. We've gotten a lot of feedback about that particular play structure. Currently, right now, it does pass a playground safety inspection by the team. Now, playground inspection, the way that it's structured, is not to eliminate any injuries for youth. It's about mitigating risk and eliminating the more life-threatening injuries, such as strangulation on a slide or impalements, those types of things that we're looking at. Now, that said, I think your question about Lark Park is very much so warranted, and one that I can add to the pile of conversations about that play structure.
So razor wire installed on the top wouldn't, probably
Yes, clearly.
mitigate.
And to add to some of the concerns that have been mentioned, when an HOA, when a new neighborhood's built, an HOA is not intact right away with the citizens of that
Correct.
neighborhood. It's built, a developer seeds it, or controls it, and through their property management company usually, and that can
Correct.
go for 2+ years, right? Like in my neighborhood.
Yep.
And so they built a basketball court in my neighborhood, but the developer must have crammed it in there because a third of the basketball court's broken, the concrete's broken and shuffing off, right? So, and for 2+ years, there was no real functional elected HOA of people that lived there. So it just might be another consideration.
And some of these things may not necessarily be within the scope of the engineering standards, and maybe more within the standards of like city code, because it's more of an ongoing maintenance piece as opposed to engineering standards are about how things are built. But I think these are definitely things to take note of down the line when we start looking at implementing these and considering what other types of codes may be worthy of putting in place. Okay. Next slide. All right. One thing that's a little bit different about the park design standards versus our Volume 1 and Volume 2 engineering standards is encouragement. Now, when it comes to playground design, there is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Their standard for what is an accessible playground currently fits within all of the play structures that we have within the city. All that requires is that a child who is in a wheelchair or has a mobility device can get to the play structure and can climb upon it. I'm sure those of you with children have been to parks where you see that the entrance to the play structure has 2 steps that goes up, and then it turns and goes up, and it's kind of open on the other 2 sides. Have you noticed that? What that's called is actually called a transfer deck. That transfer deck is what a child in a wheelchair is supposed to use to move onto, and theoretically, they would be able to crawl up the stairs to use the rest of it. That's what is considered as the bare minimum standards by the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are many different opinions on whether or not that is truly accessible or not. A principle that has been pressed by the National Recreation and Parks Association and by many other park users across the country is what is called inclusive design. And this is creating standards or creating park spaces and park playgrounds that are truly usable by all users. The long and short of it is that every feature within a park, every user should be able to get to and interact with in some way. Not in the same way, but in some way. An example of a truly inclusive design park is the picture that we have on the screen for you. This is Marshall Park that is in Vancouver. This playground was developed by Harper's Playground. And if you've had an opportunity to be out there, and if you haven't, I strongly encourage you to go take a look at it because it is a very cool park. The topography of this park has a large hill in the middle that has an accessible path that allows you to get up to the top. And from there are ledges that you can either sit on and sit and have lunch with and spend time with people, but also it's a transfer deck that a kid can move onto and then slide down the hill. So instead of having a single slide in one spot, the entire hill is a slide. And the way that they design these parks is so that they encourage youth to interact and to have conflict, to actually have to work things out together, to be imaginative, and to create spaces for everyone. I think one thing that I'll share when it comes to parks like this is everybody has seen a jungle gym. And if you've seen a jungle gym, there's typically an apex at the very top, and only one kid can be up there at a time. And it's typically the kid who is most athletically, capable. And that's the one kid who can make it up there. And it's only one kid at a time. With this park, every kid can reach the highest point. Every kid can get up there, regardless of their ability. And so what I'm looking at potentially putting in our standards is not a requirement that these types of parks be built, but that we encourage developers to consider these inclusive design principles when developing parks. So these are not things that we can require them to do, but they are things that we could strongly encourage them to. And it all starts with conversation when they turn in their applications or they first reach out to the city and say, we would like to build something. And you wouldn't think that those conversations actually go somewhere, but there have been plenty of times where we've had conversations with developers saying, hey, did you notice that you could put this type of thing in and it would cost the same amount? Or did you think that there's a trail, just 100 yards from where your open space ends? Have you considered putting a trail through there? And then when they turn in their second application, lo and behold, that trail has now shown up. So this is one of those things that we've placed within here. This is all that I have for play structures at this point. Do you guys have questions about playgrounds overall?
I don't have questions, but I am very appreciative that these discussions are happening with developers.
All right, let's talk about furniture and the things that we put inside our parks, such as benches. All right, the standards that we're looking at bringing forward to you would require that all of the things that are put within a park be weather resistant, they be accessible, and that they are maintainable. So I'm sure that you've been to Home Depot and you've been able to buy a bench that you could put within your house. Those are wonderful benches that work great for your maybe front yard. That said, when putting a permanent and durable item within a park, they need to be built to a higher standard. Out of materials that are weather resistant so that they're easy to clean and they do not deteriorate over time, and so that they are strong enough to support all users as they come through there. A park bench, for example, within a park typically costs about $5,000 to $6,000. They're not cheap items. And the next time you're at a park, really look at the fixtures that are within it and you'll start to understand why. Because we want those to last a long time and they want them to be usable. All right, within here, routes within parks is something I want to point out. Within all of our parks, we have different sidewalks or paths that get you from one place to another. Those paths, according to the U.S. Forest Service, are not known as paths, they're not known as trails, they're known as outdoor recreation access routes. Essentially, we need to make sure that these paths are accessible to all users. A clear example of where we do not have this within our city is in Abrams Park. There is an accessible restroom at Abrams Park that does not have an accessible route to get to it. Next time you're there, take a look. It's very challenging when you see something like that. That's one of those things that we hope to rectify in the future, that when there are updates, that just because we have accessible items, we want to make sure that you can actually get to them and that you can get to all of them across the city. Okay. Next slide. Here are some examples of some of the items that the standards we're looking at addressing. For example, trash cans. You may have noticed that it rains a lot here, about 6 months out of the year. So requiring that all trash cans have durable lids on top of them to help prevent rain collection. We have plenty of trash cans in our parks that don't have lids, and the crew actually has to poke holes in the bottom so that they don't collect water. It also creates a big mess for them when they have to clean up. Requiring that restrooms are all accessible and weather resistant, and that weather resistance is important. For example, when we get a deep freeze like what we have right now, sometimes our porcelain toilets break. We had 2 break last year at Abrams, which was a bummer. If they placed steel toilets instead, you would not have that issue. That's one thing that we could look at including in standards. Dog waste station, yeah, they're a little chilly, so apologize. But dog waste stations, so requiring that dog waste stations be placed throughout the city and high usable areas within our parks and at every trail entrance. Picnic tables, requiring that picnic tables have accessible spaces at them and that they are made of proper materials. Benches, again, accessible and affixed to a footing in the ground. There are a couple of benches that we have in our city that are not accessible to individuals with disabilities, which is really unfortunate. Bike racks, requiring that bike racks be placed within a particular parks within the city and that they are fixed to the ground, and possibly picking out a particular design that can be replicated across. And then finally, lighting. We could require lighting across all of our arterial trails across the city to make them safe at other times of the day. Things like that. Next slide. On top of requiring what characteristics the amenities and fixtures have, there is a question of what needs to be included in particular parks. The city has 3 different types of parks that we currently define. Those are pocket parks, which are smaller community areas that serve a particular small part of our community. The picture on there is actually of Crow's Nest Park. Some of you may have seen that at the end of, I don't know that road. Sevier? No, not Sevier. It's right over here by Overlook. Yeah. Eagle's Nest Park. Is it Eagle's View? Oh. Ah, man. Look at me being that parks manager. Eagles View Park. Thank you, Vice Chair Shell. We have our neighborhood parks, which are kind of our medium-sized parks. DeMello Park is a good example of a neighborhood park. And our community parks are our larger parks or our more specialty parks. So Overlook Park is a community park. Paradise Point is a community park. And Abrams Park is a community park. So we'd specify that based on the type of park that is being put in, they would have to have specific amenities. For example, community parks need to have restrooms because these are serving larger areas of the community where people are commuting in. A pocket park, on the other hand, does not need a restroom because it's serving that local small neighborhood. Requiring certain signage, and one of the unique things that we've placed within here is that for community parks, you would be required to have some sort of monument sign, a unique sign that's specific to that park. So Abrams Park has a very unique sign when you come into it. The Rourke has a very unique sign when you go into it that's got the electronic, numbers and stuff that's on there. And so we'd like to have a monument sign for each of our community parks to help designate that space. Any questions on amenities and fixtures?
So back to the lighting on the trails. If all city parks and trails close at dusk, why would we put lighting in them?
It's a very good question. I think that's something for us to consider for arterial trails one day. If we have arterial trails that are serving transportation purposes one day, that may be something that the city could consider otherwise. There are other municipalities that allow those to be traversed during other parts of the day, especially as we get shorter days of the year. But that's something to consider.
I mean, I could see like if it was a trail segment that connected two neighborhoods, like if kids were coming home, because our neighborhoods are lit, and if they were to ride a short segment, but to go off on a very long trail that would be lit would seem counterintuitive to get out of the park when it's dusk.
Yeah, depending on what it would be, there's plans that the city has to build a trail along G Creek, and that could potentially be a multimodal trail, and lighting might be something that is considered, but I think that's some of the stuff that you all can think about.
Okay.
Okay, because I think an hour after sunset would still be good for lighting.
I think it's in here. We're gonna address that. We're gonna get to that, right? The times that it's changing to.
Yeah.
That's our next agenda item,
Yeah.
yes.
I had some things about the fixtures. I don't know, do all of the parks have garbage cans?
All of the parks,
Because I like to make sure that we get garbage cans and all of that. I
Yeah.
think that's a must.
For your dog.
that is a must. The proposed standards that may be coming to you would require that every park has trash cans. Pocket parks would have to have at least one,
Okay,
and that neighborhood parks and community parks would have to have many more than that, going into high traffic areas. And that's part of, when they submit a plan to us, we really want to take a look at where are they placing these trash cans? Does it make sense?
yeah,
If you're putting in a restroom, you need to put a trash can next to it.
right.
If you have a dog waste station, it better have a trash can on it.
And I feel very enlightened about the toilet thing in Something new, and now I understand. It makes more
Like,
sense.
why are those there? Yeah, that's why.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to signage. All right, next slide. So one of the things we're looking at is, in conjunction with the engineering standards, is putting together a Parks and Recreation side guidelines manual. This would specify to developers and builders that if they do place signs within our parks, that there's a particular style that it needs to be in. Essentially, the idea is to create spaces that are recognizable, and this is some of what we've talked about before. How do we make our trails recognizable? If you look at the small sign that's on here, the smallest, furthest to your left, is the trail sign that you discussed earlier, the end of last year. So this would expand out our potential trail options to include other types of signs. Those signs being a community park monument sign, a park rules and etiquette sign, which specifies as everything from guidelines to safety, what's prohibited, how to contact the city if something is broken, and also having potentially information in other languages. A informational kiosk is a larger sign that provides more information that may include a map, it may include some historical information to help create space and that sense of uniqueness to a park. And then interpretive signs to help educate users as well. The sign manual, these examples that I've put before you today, are not the official things that we're planning on putting in the sign manual. I'm working with the city's communication team to put together a proposal to bring back to you to get your full review and look at. But our standards that we'd be putting forward would simply state that those signs that are placed within parks have to follow the most recent Parks and Recreation side guidelines that have been put in place by the city. Any questions on signage?
I had a question on something I saw on the bottom of the information kiosk sign that it said something about the trail maintained by. Is the idea of some of this that there would be sponsorships of certain things, or is that just a boilerplate image that just had that on there?
The idea right now is that it would specify if it was an HOA-owned park or trail, that it would have information on how to contact that HOA. And if it is a city-owned trail, it would have information on how to contact the city.
Oh, very cool. All right. Thank you.
All right, next slide. The sign manual would also specify placement considerations. For example, where should a particular signage be placed? There should be a park rules and etiquette sign at every entrance of the park as opposed to just having one. Abrams Park is a very large park, 42 acres overall. To put one rules sign within the park doesn't provide that information to other users throughout the city. So Abrams Park may have 5, 6, or 7 individual park signs at each entrance, whether it be a trail entrance, but have simply the monument sign that's the big one that you see when you come in. Requiring that community parks have interpretive signage so we can tell stories, talking about oak mitigation or talking about native populations that have been here for generations, or to talk about some of the first development that came to this community, or to talk about birds and the refuge. Those are the types of things that we want to encourage developers and builders to put within our parks. Any other questions on signs? All right, next slide. Landscaping. All right. Part of this really comes down to water sustainability. So the standards that I'm looking at bringing to you would tell developers to continue utilizing our development code when they turn in their applications for what should be built within parks. Currently, they have to submit a landscaping plan, they have to utilize the native plant list, and they have to submit a tree plan. of where is everything going to be placed, what are all the species that are being put in, and how it's being considered. So we would still require them to use those to tell us as a city what they plan on putting in. For water sustainability, this is really about irrigation. For an irrigation system that you probably have at your house, there is typically a single place that you are scheduling all of the different zones for irrigation. For a larger space, sometimes a developer may put in what are called nodes. A node is essentially a battery-operated timing device that will run that particular zone. Nodes are typically used in stormwater facilities to establish vegetation and then are abandoned after 2 years because the vegetation has then taken place. We have seen these put into parks as a more inexpensive way to get an irrigation system built at initial construction, but then when the batteries die, it is hard to maintain that irrigation. On top of that, when you have so many different nodes, so for example, Greeley Park, there are 17 different zones or nodes that we have within that one park. So each one of these devices, our crew needs to go out and they need to sync them all up to the exact same time, and then they have to set them to be within a certain time frame to start. Because if 2 of them turn on at the same time, there's not enough water pressure and nothing gets watered. So that means when a battery dies within 17 different zones, it will throw off all of them. To have one crew, one staff member, or a team of staff member to go out there and try and get these to be all within sync takes hours and hours and hours of work that they could be using on other parts of our parks. And this is simply because the developer didn't want to have all of the electrical wires run to each of those zones to have a central location where they're all managed. That's how they're supposed to be built. That's the most efficient way for them to be built. And more importantly, it's a great way for us to have water sustainability, because then we're not wasting water instead of having not enough water pressure. But 2, let's say we're having a water crisis in the city and we need to throttle back our water usage. If we were to go out to Greeley, they're going to have to go around to each of those zones to shut it off, and it's going to take time. But if it's all in one location, we can turn them off all at once. Or if I want to get really technical and really excited, one day we could have all of these run wirelessly. Manage our water system, our irrigation system for our parks from our office, which would be very helpful in terms of managing water, having water sustainability, and ensuring that we are being as ecologically friendly as possible. So the requirement that I would like us to put in here is that we require all of our irrigation systems to be direct current, meaning they do not run off batteries, as opposed to alternating current, which is batteries. That was a long way of saying, please do Kelly and the maintenance crew a solid. All right. Moving on to maintenance and safety. Next slide. This picture is a picture of the Clark County Search and Rescue Team. I've spoken with the fire department and their team about how do we ensure that if we have users on our trails, that we can get to them quickly and safely. Some of the things that help is being able to quickly identify a trail, which is where signage is very important. But 2, ensuring that we've got proper widths to ensure people can get into them. Part of this is ensuring that all of our trails are to follow our standards so that maintenance workers can get into them and emergency responders can get into them. That's kind of the first piece. So when looking at the rest of our standards, this is a key component that we want our developers to keep in mind. We would also require that every park have a 10-foot by 40-foot designated work zone parking spot. Essentially a space where our truck and trailer with the maintenance equipment can pull in safely off the road instead of putting our crew right on the road. I'm always worried that someone's going to get hit by a car one day, and to give them that space helps keep them safe and helps keep the public safe.
So will that space be marked for them so people will know not to park there?
Yes, and
Okay.
there's unique ways of building them in so that they blend into the environment. For example, you may have seen, it's just like bricks that allow grass to grow through it. You may have seen some of those in places that you've been. That's typically a work zone parking spot where they can pull the trailer in. Okay. Next question, or next slide. Okay. Before I dig into what's next, let's talk about any questions you may have about any of those standards that I put forward to you tonight. I know that we had a lot to talk about. Thoughts, feelings, good, bad.
I just have one thing about the playground stuff with the development and encouraging them. How often do you feel like they would actually switch from, the standard, like pick that out of a magazine, play structure, put it there, and actually, what other than doing good for the community would incentive do they have to build something a little bit more like that kind of playground?
Absolutely. Incentive-wise, it's better for home prices. It's part of it too. By having a nicer amenity within their park, it allows them to attract different types of buyers. Most of the time when these developers are coming in, they want to do good by us. They want to do good by the community. It really comes down to that relationship. We help influence them on how they, where they place roads and where things go. It's very rare that we'll have a developer come in and just say, like, this is what I want and I don't want to move whatsoever. They come to us with questions more than answers. They would like to build something, and so we help navigate them through that process in a way. So, for example, we had a developer who was bringing an apartment complex into the community, and they looked at having an open space, and they just thought about having a green open space. And one of the things that I recommended to them, and I pulled out the map to show them where are the other park assets in the area. I'm like, this is an apartment complex that's likely to have young families. Typically, apartments have lower income individuals within them. I said, there is currently no playground within a reasonable distance without crossing a very busy road. Like, you should consider putting one in. Consider putting in a play structure because it will drive down your crime rates in your area. Your youth will have something to do, and you'll be able to attract users this way, and they're moving in that direction. They've done the same thing with trails as well. We had a developer who was putting in a green space that was going to have a storm pond and then just some wetland area that was going to be pretty for people to look at. And what they didn't know was that just on the other side of the creek that they were building on was one of our parks, Long Park, if you've been out to it. I remember the actual name. We call it Long Park because it's long and there's a trail that dead ends at the end of it and it doesn't go anywhere. And I said, you're about 100 feet from that, about 100 feet. If you built your trail to this line, I'm sure we could talk to this HOA right here and build a trail that would connect us into it. And now we've got a trail that can connect us all the way down to Pioneer. And lo and behold, their second application that they turned in had that trail within it. So we're encouraged, I'm encouraged that a lot of the developers that are coming in are wanting to do right by us. Yeah, of course, they're here to make money and sell houses and whatnot, but they want to do right by us. And it comes down to that relationship. So I'm encouraged by it.
Well, and I think that's a positive thing for the people moving into those areas. Right now, how many developers are working with these spaces with you guys at this time? Like,
How many developers?
yeah, like how many different? So there's the apartment one, but how many are there that?
I'd say there's probably like 30 developments happening right now.
Okay,
Now,
and
this
I
is
think
of,
that's
like-
really important to know.
Yeah, and these are like varying sizes. Some of them
Right.
are very small, like maybe 5 houses, and some of them are Paradise Point that has like 300. Now, like there's just varying differences in what those look like. So, and all of those have to follow the same 25% of the property has to be dedicated to outdoor spaces, and so this helps us press them towards. If you're going to put in something like this.
So I see the timeline here tonight. We're working on this February 12th. March 13th is when this will be presented to the city council with some of the recommendations that we've put in. But between now and March 13th, do we still have time to reach out to you outside of the meeting?
Oh, of course.
And give more input?
Please,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. And we
Probably
encourage the
before
public
March
to.
13th, but maybe by the 9th or 10th.
Yeah, and we encourage the public to
Yeah.
reach out as well and let us
Okay.
know their thoughts.
All right.
Yeah, and with this, when we go to council on March 13th, it may shift probably the 13th. What we're going to be bringing them is essentially the same presentation I'm bringing you tonight. We'll be having an open discussion on what are their opinions on what's being brought forward and what those shifts may be. When we come back to you in April, we'll have more of a formal draft to start looking at those very specific language that would be within it.
All right. Are there any other questions for park and trail design standards? All right, well, moving on to business, consideration of, the next on the agenda is our business item with the consideration of recommendation to council to adopt amendment to the Ridgefield Municipal Code 8.18. Mr. Crownhart?
Oh, okay. We'll keep doing this.
Another
Okay.
coffee.
Another coffee? I can do
Have a
that.
piece of chocolate.
Yeah, I'm just glad that I'm healthy today. All right. Ridgefield Municipal Code 8.18 Code Amendments. This is the code that specifies the parks, rules, and regulations. We've discussed this last year, and we took your feedback, put it together with our legal team, and they've brought forward some potential amendments to our standards. So tonight, our objective is to discuss the standards, and I'm requesting a motion at some point for the proposed amendments that are brought to you today. Next slide. With that, let's go over some of the basic changes that are within this. I've put it into a slide format, so it's a little bit easier, but in your packet, you'll also see the official language of those code updates. When looking at operational amendments, first thing these amendments would provide is that it would extend our rules beyond our trails to our parks, city parks and trails regulations, rules and regulations. And that would be updated throughout the code. We'd be updating our hours of operation for parks from the previous rules of being 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. is shifting it to 1 hour before sunrise and 1 hour after sunset to fit with the purpose of why we close the parks at night. It's because of visibility. Now, that does not mean that there can't be exceptions built in for particular parks or particular amenities or for events. The city manager can still make those changes with city council's approval or city council's oversight. In terms of operations and maintenance, we've added in that the public cannot interfere with maintenance, and that if they would like to partake in maintenance support for any of our parks, if they would like to take care of a flower bed or trim a tree, they can, but they need to talk to us first and get approval by the city. You'd be surprised how many people go into parks and want to help out by pulling out their mower and helping mow, which is, I love the initiative, but there's questions of liability and risk when coming in and doing that type of work. And then finally, having requirements for when there are temporary improvements and maintenance that's done within our parks that can be done by our team or by volunteers. But if we were to have volunteers or our staff do any permanent, durable improvements, these are improvements that would last more than a year. Say we wanted to erect a new sign, we wanted to install a new restroom or build a new play structure within a space that doesn't currently have one, then those updates or those improvements need to come to the Parks Board and to Council for approval. You approve master plans for all of our parks, which states that all of our parks need to fall within those master plans. So if we do updates, it's your job to make sure that we're following those master plans. Cool. Slide. Rule amendments. We've changed the rules to focus in on 3 particular types of rules. Those activities that are not permitted in parks at any circumstance, activities that are permitted within parks only with city approval or special events, and to have those that can be allowed under certain situations or with approval by the city manager. First would be to disallow the use of inhalant tobacco within the park, so you cannot vape and you cannot smoke. within any of our parks or within any of our trails. It would also prohibit the use of marijuana within our parks and trails. This would also disallow the use of open carry of firearms and other weapons within the park. If a resident or a citizen would like to do has a concealed weapons permit, those are still permitted within the parks based on these standards, but it would not allow users to open carry within the parks or trails.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
These are parks and trails rules. Some of them cross over, or do these also apply to city streets?
These particular rules would not.
Okay. Do we have a rule for the open carry on city streets?
I'm not
That's
sure.
allowed, isn't it?
We'd have to talk to our police department. They would probably know more than I would on that.
Okay.
Just clarification on the thing. It says, not on this one, but here it says negligent operation of motor vehicle, including operating in an area not specifically. Does that mean motor vehicles are allowed? Because I didn't see a section where it says then it was.
I think that's specifically, so you can drive a vehicle within a park, within the parking lots. But it would essentially say that you can't drive them unsafe within that parking lot. And if you were to go off of the parking lot, then that would be outside of the use of that area.
Okay, so, because I don't see anywhere mentioning no motor vehicle on trails or anything. So is that,
I think it mentions it early when it talks about.
Is that because these are amendments and it already has something in the rule about non-motorized vehicles on the trail?
I didn't see that. I thought it was crossed out for some reason.
Could you tell me, do you know which section that's in, Member Pache?
The non-permitted activities, number 1A,
On
8/18/40.
or 1.
040, 818,
1B, I mean, sorry.
It's under the 818040, non-permitted activities. If it's not specifically designated for motor vehicle usage.
Yeah, this specifies that when it comes to specific trails, that would fall underneath the, I'm trying to find the spot in here. Essentially, rules can be created by the city manager or their designee and posted on those particular facilities if more rules are needed. So let's say, for example, a trail is designated to not allow e-bikes or golf carts on them. As long as we posted it, then it would fall within those rules. But this doesn't specifically say that you can't use e-bikes on trails.
Okay.
I had a question. It would be under section, 8.18.050, all the way forward to page 7. And it would be under the, page 7, number 7. It says a park and facility, let's see. Yeah, use permit shall not be required for an expressive event as defined in the city code. If a group or an organization has a permit in one of our parks, say Abrams Park, and another group wants to come in and hold an expressive event within their permitted area, is that forbidden or allowed?
According to this, if you have a permit for the use of a particular space within a park, it is exclusive to that user.
Okay, so that user has the right to say, please don't do that in
the area that you have specifically reserved. So for
Reserved.
example, if you
Through the city.
reserved Abrams Park or Bennett
Like the
Hall,
Bennett
which
Hall.
includes Bennett Hall and the patio, that is the only space that we could say, no, you can't do that here. But if they were to do it just off of that site, then they would be permitted to do so.
Okay.
questions on the rules? Okay, let's move into use agreements. The updated code also specifies the different types of agreements that the city would recognize, those being lease agreements, which allows users to have access to spaces, exclusive access to spaces such as storage for Pacific Soccer, that's one that we have. Conducting business within parks, so if there were to be a fair to sell items or to have any type of transaction has to be approved by the city. Concession agreements, which is the exclusive right to conduct business. So we have this at the Rourke with the Raptors who sell concessions there, as well as Ridgefield Little League that has concessions during baseball games in Abrams. And then temporary permits, which is our reservation permits. Moving on to the next one. This is probably the biggest shift within the code that we've got coming forward, is how we name our parks, trails, and facilities within the city. The way that it's being proposed is that when a new property is acquired by the city that will be doing some type of construction for a park asset, a working title would be selected by the city staff that would take into consideration place and potentially who's donated that space. That working title will be used during the design and construction phase. At some point in the construction phase, we would then go into a public engagement campaign to get the public's feedback on what should this park be called? What does the public want it to be? We'd allow anybody to share their comments with the city through our communications team, and all of that feedback would then be brought to the Parks Board for consideration. And then you'd be able to hold a public hearing, which would be exciting because we don't actually do public hearings in Parks Board, but now you would be able to do public hearings. So then that would allow individuals to come in and have their 3 minutes and say why they think this park needs to be named for this particular reason or purpose. From there, you'd be able to make recommendations to City Council, who would then take a look at those recommendations and then have the final authority on what the name of that park or trail may be. But this is a unique opportunity to allow really formalize the way with which the community can take ownership of these parks and trails.
Yeah, I really like this part. I think it's neat to bring in the community and have them have the ownership piece.
Wonderful. Next slide.
I think, yeah, on that, I have a question for Corey. I think it's a terrific thing to have that process there. The concern I have is that when we have a working name selected, that the general guidelines that were outlined around it being a historical, geographical, or some cultural significance, that would be incorporated into the working name selection or more formally required. I think my concern is that it's a terrific process to instate, but I know that once a name is selected, people get attached to names. Anything that we've done that's temporary typically ends up being not temporary after a while. Mm-hmm. And so I'd just be concerned that a working name would not be as thoroughly vetted, but then may end up having an influence on naming going forward.
There's a potential of that for sure, Member Bicknell. One of the things that I believe is within these standards is that once a name has been chosen, it is the name that the city will utilize to describe this park. So not even within the maintenance crew, there will not be nicknames titled to it. Any publications that are put out would have the official name that's for this park, and we encourage the public to use that name as well.
Sorry, are there any thoughts on land acknowledgement? Like in British Columbia, in Vancouver, parts of Vancouver, you'll see most of the signs all indicate this park is on the ancestral lands of. It's like a standard.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could include within the sign standards that we spoke about in the previous agenda item. If you'd like, I can note that when I talk to the communications team. In terms of within the code itself, I don't know if that's the most appropriate place for that.
Well, and the council and the lawyers would have to double check the language, obviously, to make sure it's, yeah. Thank you, Corey.
I know there's been conversation with the Cowlitz tribe as far as including those names in any of the parks that are what they considered on their, prior property. And, even the Chinook tribe, I mean, we can certainly collaborate with them, but whether it be a policy or not, I guess that would be, the council would decide if they wanted to pull that in as a policy.
Well, and for interpretation, they would have had some of their own names for these areas already, so that could be like an interpretive component that might be interesting or,
Absolutely.
yeah.
All right. Next up. All right. Questions, comments, thoughts on these code updates?
I noticed in the code they've included the use of alcohol within permits. Are they going to be specific in defining which, like, are there only certain parks that those permits would be allowed? Like, for example, Horns Corner, is it up to the discretion of the city or the designee, city manager, the designee, or would all parks be considered for that?
It would fall underneath the special event permitting process. So that's outside of the park-specific rules and really falls more into City Hall, our events and community engagement arm of the city. But I know that if somebody wants to do an event, like, say, what's the big dinner event we do in the street?
The farm to table.
Farm to
dinner.
table, yes. Like that, for example, is not within a park, but does go through a special event process, and that's how alcohol service is approved, is through those processes.
I didn't know if they wanted to specifically state the parks that alcohol events would be permitted, or if they wanted to specifically say, I don't know if that's a good idea to start saying like neighborhood parks would not be allowed, just flat out no, or Paga parks are not allowed, only, or maybe only the parks of certain square footage, or like the city, only city parks, I don't know. Because a neighborhood park that's within an HOA, does the city still have the right to disallow alcohol?
Yes.
And can you get an event permit for a park that's within an HOA?
No, that is not a city, it's not a city property, so that's gonna be.
So if the HOA allowed for the event, could the HOA say alcohol is allowed, or could the city then intervene and say, you can allow your permits, but we can override and say no alcohol is allowed?
I am not sure on that. I have to
Yeah.
talk to our legal team to find out. But these rules and this code apply specifically to Ridgefield parks
City
and
parks.
trails. Yeah, city parks and trails.
I know that's kind of it's a little bit of a new venture for the city of Ridgefield Parks. Before that was just, no. And so we've slowly worked our way into it. And I just think, maybe we should look closely at that specific allowing alcohol within a permit. Like, are there certain parks that we want to upfront exclude? That's a city park, whereas I couldn't name all of them.
Community park or something.
Yeah, or just even it's a city park, Lark, like that one's excluded
Yeah.
because it's in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
If we want to go that far, or if we just leave it at the discretion of the city manager or the designee.
Yeah, and as of right now, they have to get approval to have it, as opposed to it being permitted in certain circumstances. Like, regardless of the park or trail, if they would like to do alcohol, they have to go through a process.
Okay.
They have to go through a rigorous process with City Hall to get that permit.
So as it stands, it kind of sounds like any park could be allowed.
Depending on the unique situations that
Yeah.
come forward, yes. But I
Okay.
think this is also to take into consideration that the code doesn't have to be updated every time we get a new park. When
Okay.
new assets are acquired there,
Sure.
then it is goes through that process to determine is that the appropriate use of that space.
Is the dog park it does, never mind, I answered my own question.
You're good.
I just have two questions. The first one is back to like, there's a section about all the dog, it must be on leash unless designated as dog park or off leash areas. Are there any parks that are off leash other than the dog park?
There's not.
Okay. And then the other one is on page 5, talking about permits. And I'm just wondering, like with Davis Park, when they have the summer, oh my gosh, it's blanking on me right now. The Saturday, and even the kids thing, does this go towards them, like needing proof of insurance in the amount of $1 million per occurrence? So, like,
Anytime
is
you do
that,
a special event permit with the city, they have to provide documentation stating.
okay,
that
but
they've
it's not
done
like the
this.
individual vendor that needs to provide that? Is it the whole, like, market,
It's
the
full
Saturday
permit,
market?
like it's the full market that puts in for that, not like each individual.
Oh, okay, I was like, that's kind of, okay, got it.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
for the entire thing, they have to submit for it.
And the Nature Interpretation Center is going to be built out at the Carty unit, and they're going to be doing a lot of thought process and thought work around engaging the public, inclusivity, many of the same things, and also naming. So because it's a combined sort of an asset of the city that draws people here, it might be positive to encourage some cross engagement there in terms of how they're going to name or what they might do, or see how it could flow or guide people out there.
Is there any more discussion? All right, if there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion to recommend the proposed amendment for RMC 818 to the City Council.
I recommend to amend RMC 818, the amendments to City Council.
I second that.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Please say nay. Motion passes. All right, so moving on to public comment. If anyone is requesting to speak to the board regarding all items not subject to a specific public hearing may come forward at this time. Please state your name and limit comments to 3 minutes. Written comments may be submitted to the clerk prior to the meeting. One. All right, moving on to staff reports.
I get to talk more, great. All right, couple of updates for you on some council actions. One at our January 9th city council meeting. Mayor Ron Onslow officially retired, just to formally let you know. At the January 23rd city council meeting, there was a selection of a new mayor, Mayor Matt Cole, and Mayor Pro Tem Judy Chipman. And in terms of business, the City Council did consider and approved your 2025 Parks Board of Commissioners work plan. Thank you, Chair Taylor, for coming in and helping present on that one. Announcements. The Parks Board is officially looking for another Parks Board member. And specifically, we're looking for a youth member. The member must be 14 to 17 at the time of appointment. You can learn more by going to the city's website. In terms of process, the applications are due on February 26th, and the appointment is scheduled to be made on March 13th. So at our next meeting as Parks Board, you will not have this member here yet. They will be appointed the following day. However, we will have an agenda item to discuss the incorporation of this youth member to ensure that we are incorporating them as full members of the Parks Board. There's not an asterisk next to their name. They have full voting rights as the rest of you have. That said, we want to recognize that having a younger member within our team requires us to possibly function slightly differently to ensure that we're protecting the well-being of the youth and we're making sure that their voice is fully heard. So myself and either Deputy City Manager Notnaris will be joining me, or we may have an outside speaker from, I believe it's the Clark County Youth Council. They may be coming in as well to talk about some of the processes and things that they've dealt with. So be ready to come with questions and to ask things at that next one. Other things coming up next, I want to remind you that we will not be having a Parks Board meeting in May. I will be at the Washington Recreation and Parks Association Annual Conference in beautiful Tri-Cities. I will bring back pictures. And as for my get outside message, I just want to remind everyone that if you're going to be running outside to stay healthy, it is still dark outside, so please wear visible high-vis vests so that people can see you, because we want to make sure that everybody is, one, being healthy outside, but is also being safe outside. That's all that I have.
For the youth member, will there be a training, like a little bit of a training, like Robert's Rules of Orders and things that they won't know for their age group, and
Absolutely.
expectations and how you interact with the public?
Yeah, we're putting together a
Language.
full onboarding plan to provide them the support that they may need as they're coming in. One of the things that we consider when we bring on any of our Parks Board members is the knowledge that they bring to the table is respected. So we don't know what level of knowledge they'll bring, and we want to respect that. So I'm prepared to help in any way that they might need, whether it's learning Robert's rules or understanding how city government works, and we'll be sure to get them connected in the right areas. Currently, our onboarding and support plans are looking at having them connect with council members regularly as well to help them get more mentorship and training along the way.
So we're taking applications now,
Yes,
and when do the applications close? I know-
February 26th.
I knew I read it, but okay. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to share?
Oh, come on, I'm the only one that spoke all this?
I would like to congratulate our schools in passing their school levies. And I think you'll have fun in Tri-Cities, Corey. One of my kids' favorite parks is in Tri-Cities. I don't remember the name, but they really like a park there that we've been to. With that, no, you don't have anything to share?
January had lots of sunny days, so we went to different parks. We went park hopping throughout the city, so that was kind of fun to explore new parks. Yeah.
Very cool.
It's really fun. All right. Well, then we can adjourn this meeting at, I don't have my glasses on. 8:11. I don't have that fancy little thing. And I'm gonna learn Robert's rules right along with that new member.